morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your Ticker Guy podcast for the 4th. This morning, I posted a path forward to reopen the economy right now. And I'm not sure that even if we do it right now, that we have not done critical damage to supply chains that may kill people. In fact, they may kill a lot of people. We won't know that for another month or two, but the unfortunate reality is that what we've done has inflicted damage both in those supply chains that cannot be seen immediately but will show up, and it has also inflicted upon us a climate of fear. Neighbors narking on neighbors for walking their dog, people being harassed for going for a run in a park, or even ticketed and threatened with arrest. One municipality in Kentucky is actually putting ankle bracelets on people who they have found outside their residence. And Walton County has passed an ordinance under emergency measures with a simple voice vote to ban you from sitting in your backyard. We're not kidding, folks. These are real measures. Okay? The Walmarts across this country have installed gates to prohibit entry of people until someone else has exited. You're now queuing for an indefinite period of time in order to buy food. And think about that one, folks. In order for you to buy food, you must queue in line like an animal. Kind of like my cat does when I feed him in the morning. Meow, meow, meow. And then he sits there patiently while I get the food out of the bin for him. Well, now we're doing that. We don't go to the grocery store, walk in, and get our food anymore. Now we must patiently follow their rules. And this is all for our own good, we're told. But let me read to you a response to one of the things that I put up. This is from an actual dentist. Okay, a real person who practices real medicine on real people. And most of us don't think of dental work as being all that big of a deal because today, in our modern world, for the most part, it isn't. You go to the dentist, they clean your teeth. If you get unlucky or you just got a bad draw in the genetic lottery, I did, by the way, every now and then something goes kind of sort of sideways on you. And as a result, I have a couple of crowns, and I've had to have one root canal under essentially immediate basis. When you need that, you need it right now. Those things used to kill people, folks. Abscessed teeth, they were a very common cause of death in the 18th and 19th century. Why? Because the infection that is going on in the root of your tooth cannot be cured with antibiotics. The reason for that is the antibiotics don't get in there. And so what ends up happening is that infection continues to grow and grow and grow. Eventually, it gets up into your brain through your sinuses. And once that happens, you're very likely to die. Well, modern dentistry has made that not really so much of a big deal. You go to the dentist because you have a really bad toothache, but you need it fixed now. Not in a week, not in a month, not whenever they decide to drop their crazy constraints. You need it repaired today or tomorrow. If you call a dentist and tell them that you have this kind of a thing going on, they will put you in a chair immediately, unless of course, you're like in a place like Pennsylvania where they've banned those procedures. But that's folks, not the biggest problem, okay? Let me point out this to you. All right? This individual says he is not very long from ending up back in, well, the 19th century. Why? Because of supply chains. He ordered ahead. He needs scalpels, masks, medicine, anesthetics, these kinds of things. Okay? So he smelled this coming a month or so before all the lockdowns started and things got crazy, and he has a couple of months' supply. But when those things run out right now, he can't get any more of them. So he's a couple months away from essentially being back in the 19th century, which means that they give you a bottle of whiskey to chug and then he goes at your diseased tooth to yank it out using what amounts to a pair of pliers. Yeah, it's a little more sophisticated than that, but not a lot. But all the things that we do now, they fill your mouth full of Novocaine, feels like you got a tennis ball in there, and then they've got all these nice composites and ceramics and a little machine that makes crowns right in the building. It's really quite magical by today's standards. They've got a machine that takes the measurements after they do the gross work, and then essentially transfers that electronically to a computerized multi-axis mill that makes the crown. It's. I have one in my mouth. I know exactly how it works. All that's going to go away, folks. And not in a long period of time either. Okay, this is somebody who was prepared for this. Secondly, since we've cleared all the hospitals and ERs and we've banned elective procedures and everything else, if you're in a place that isn't full of COVID patients right now, you have nothing to do. There are a huge number of places across this country right now that don't have any COVID patients in them, and in fact, they have no patients in them at all. So what are you doing with those hospitals right now? Well, you're not doing anything. And guess what that means? Your hours are getting cut, or you're getting furloughed. You're getting laid off. Now, you say, well, but they're still there if you need a heart attack. Well, yes, as long as the supplies hold out, they are. We think we know all about these supply chains and we know all these things. Folks, you have no idea. I do. But you have no idea. Just give you one little example. There are a whole bunch of precision parts that go into a lot of things that we use and need every day. In fact, for those things that are necessary for us to have our normal existence in this country, a substantial number of those pieces are highly precision pieces of machinery. They're little bits and pieces here and there, a gear here, a lever there, and every one of them is made using the processes that go back through some other part of the supply chain. Well, all those factories are closed. All those lines are shut down. The raw material producing that goes into those particular little machine shops, it's shut down. Powdered metal plants, for example, are shut down because they're not essential. They're not supposedly oh boy. Folks, do you have any idea how this stuff works? I mean, we have CAD/CAM machines and automated milling machines that you can take a file and put it in there, and they'll make parts for you out of bar stock. But first off, you have to have the bar stock. That's the first thing, okay? And then you have to have the tooling because that machine uses tooling in order to produce that. And in order for it to work, that tooling has to be a very specific shape and size, and it has to be extremely precise. And therefore, the old school way that people who, like myself, I know how to run a mill, for example. I can take a piece of tool steel and I can grind it into a tool, and then I can use that on a manual mill or a manual lathe and make parts. All right? But that's manually. The automated machine can't use that because it's not in the precise dimensions that it expects. And the only way to do that with those precise dimensions is to have the tooling available, and when it gets out of specification and the machine stops, asks you for a new one. Well, what if you don't have a new one? What if all you can do is take the one that's in there and regrind it, but now it doesn't fit the specifications anymore because it can't? You remove some of the material. Well, that machine's worthless. So now what do you got? How many, by the way, how many of those people that can run those computer-aided machines, how many of them can sit down at an old Bridgeport mill and make a part on that Bridgeport mill by hand? How many of them are good enough to be able to do that? Well, there's a few. I'm not real good with a metal lathe or a mill. Good enough. I make parts when I need to. I used to have a little one. Why? Because I built a rebreather from scratch, and one of the things I needed was a bunch of one-off little parts, mostly made out of brass because it was in a high oxygen environment, and steel burns. So never mind that steel didn't get along real well with salt water. So most of the things I needed to make were made out of brass, a relatively soft material. And so I bought a bar of bar stock, and a couple of them in different sizes, and by hand made the parts I needed because I know how to run those machines. But again, I'm not especially good at it. I'm reasonably competent. But folks, think about this. Think about this. All that automated stuff that makes things in volume, it's now going to, if it isn't now, very shortly will become worthless. And you say, well, we'll just, in 2 months or 3 months, we'll just reopen the economy. No, you won't. No, you won't. Somebody is going to pop up somewhere with something that they absolutely have to have. There is no way for you to predict where this is going to come from. But what are you going to do if you need a root canal right now and you go to the dentist and the dentist has no Novocaine? And he also doesn't have any drill, the disposable ends that go in his drill. And he can't make one of those in the back room. He can't get any more right now because the supply chain is shut down. The machine, the automated machine that makes those parts that socket into his drill, it's off. It's off because it doesn't have tooling and it doesn't have raw material. And you say, well, we'll just go turn this back on in 2 or 3 months. Okay, how long is it going to take for that supply line to refill before that machine can be restarted? A month, 2 months, 3 months? Well, your tooth hurts now. Folks, you have absolutely no idea how many interconnections like this are all over the economy. They're everywhere. There's no possible way for you to single out the ones that are critical and make sure that they have supply and nobody else does. You can't do it. It's, this was comical when we started, but now it's actually getting quite serious because, frankly, you've got no one putting date certains on anything. And you didn't do it when we started either. And Trump lied. 15 days to stop the spread. So people said, well, I got a 30-day supply. I'll be all right. Well, guess what? Now it's 45 days. Oops. I'm outside of there. Well, we hope we can. Folks, hope will not make the machine tool that your dentist needs in order to be able to shape your tooth, drill the core out of it that is abscessed, and put a cap on it. So what is it? What is the option going to be? A pair of pliers? Probably. You're back to the 18th, 19th century. You're back to the kinds of things that people used to do when they gave you a bottle of whiskey and said, chug as much of this as you want for however much you can to try to dull the pain a little bit, and here we go. Before the invention of modern anesthetics, folks, they used to put the operating rooms in hospitals on the top floor. And the reason they did that was so you couldn't hear the screams. That is not BS. That is the truth. Before we had modern paralytics and anesthetics, so that you could actually knock somebody out and they wouldn't feel anything, and then you could paralyze the muscles at the same time, so the innate reaction to being chopped open didn't tear everything apart while you were doing it. You got operated on literally with a stick for your teeth, so you didn't bite your tongue in half. That is not bullshit, folks. People went into, if you had to have an operation, you were in mortal fear. You didn't know whether or not the pain was going to be worse than whatever it was that was wrong with you. Well, that's all gone now because now we have all these modern things and we have these modern tools and we have all this modern stuff. But you can't print scalpels with the Fed. The Fed cannot print scalpels. Factories have to make scalpels. You can't print machine tools. Factories have to make machine tools. The tooling that goes into our everyday life, little things. You just have no blankety blanking idea. I'll give you another example. I went to go get some food yesterday, and now we're gonna queue up like dogs or cats waiting for our owners to give us something because Walmart is now, and I'm sure this is going to happen everywhere else. All these different places are metering people in, so you're going to stand outside, queued in line for hours to get into the store in order to buy some food. Folks, that's something out of the Soviet Union. That's insanity. All right? Oh, this is temporary. Like hell it is. When's it going to go away? When's it going to stop? Nobody will give you a date. The hell, it's temporary. It's going to go on forever. And you know what's even worse? As soon as they drop these constraints, it's going to come right back. How do we know that? Because it has happened now in all of these different countries. Remember, we thought Singapore had it licked? We thought China had it licked. Of course, China lies. But we thought Singapore had it licked. We thought all these other places have it licked. And guess what? Everywhere that they thought they had it licked, it's coming back. And do you know why it's coming back? Because that's the way viruses are. We're now learning that 50% of the people who get this infection are asymptomatic, which means they can transmit it to somebody else and nobody gets sick. So they don't know they have it. They have no reason to seek medical care, and they have no reason to be tested. And you can't possibly survey everybody in the country every single day with another test. There's no possible way to do that. So what's going to end up happening is that people, but you find somebody, you quarantine them, okay, that's fine. You ask him who he was around, he tells you. Or if you want to be intrusive, you use the cell phone data monitoring, which, by the way, is what they're doing in Singapore, and they still didn't stop it. They're doing the same thing in China. They still didn't stop it. It's coming back. Why? Because that's what viruses do. And so we do all these repression things, we do all this stuff, and then at some point we have to drop some of the constraints, and as soon as we do, the virus comes back. And when is it going to come back? Right into the fall and the winter. Right when there's a lot of other flu strains going around, you're going to get co-infections with multiple things at once, and the death toll is going to be immeasurably higher than it would be now. And the worst part of it, hey, China is disappearing people. That's fantastic. But you know what? We don't have these options. We just don't. I know people think we do, that we could it'll be okay. Turn your neighbor against your neighbor. Become a police state. Just sit in your house. Be locked down. Folks, I'm telling you, my daughter and I, we don't need to work. Okay? My house closing is still going to go because all the things that needed to be done were done before. So and this was a contract that was signed a couple of months ago. So it's going to go. All right? I'm going to be in my other place. All right? And if the cops want to give me crap about moving my home's stuff between Florida and my other residence, well, guess what? I'm going up there. You can pull me over however many times you want to pull me over between here and there, folks. But this is a necessary trip. This stuff has to be from here to there. And it is less dangerous for me to move it where absolutely nobody is going to come in contact with me because all I need to do is be able to pee a couple of times during the trip. I've got bottled water in the car, so I don't need to stop and, go through a restaurant or whatever, whether it's open for drive-through or whatever have you. And when I get to the other end, I'm going to unload it. I got food and all the provisions I need the other place. I'm going to sleep there for a day or two so that and put all the stuff where it needs to go. And then I'm going to haul my evil ass back down here into Florida. And I'm going to be here for a few more days. And then when closing time comes, there will be one final time that I go one direction, and that's it. It's over. And if they want to give me a hard time about that, I'm all, well, you go ahead and you give me all the hard time you want. But what are you going to do? You're going to turn me around? Hey, listen, if I have to, I will sue. Okay, I will seek an immediate injunction because this is an absolutely necessary thing that has to happen. Why? Because I'm under contract. I got to be out of here. Legally, I have to leave. How else can I do it? But here's the thing. For me, this is an inconvenience. I've got food there. I got food here. Everything's fine. All right? That's not the problem. The problem is, what happens if 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, I have an abscessed tooth? And I go to the dentist, and I call the dentist office, and I say, hey, man, I need this damn thing. It needs to be drilled right now. And he says, well, that's unfortunate, Mr. Denninger. We don't have any bits to go in the drill. Oops. Now what do you got? And by the way, the dental practice here is all one-time use instruments. That's infection control. Okay? Do they even still have an autoclave big enough to be able to... And by the way, are the instruments durable enough to survive going through an autoclave? I don't have any idea. They may not be. Then what happens? What, you got rubber handles on there. You can't put those things in an autoclave. They'll disintegrate. I mean, folks, we have built an economy that doesn't work the way it used to work. Okay? Medical and dental offices don't work that way. And we're just talking about medicine here. We're not talking even about things like, the power plant. Okay? You need a bearing for a generator end. All right, those great big generators in a power station. Well, guess what? Bearings fail. right? So the bearing fails, and normally we would just send the engineers down there, and they have another bearing. They put, well, what if he doesn't have another bearing? Well, we'll just, hey, man, Timken makes those. It's no big deal. Excuse me, Timken is closed. Why is Timken closed? Well, that's just ordinary manufacturing. That's not, oh, my God. And oh, by the way, the people that supplied them with the metal and the balls that go into that, they're closed too. And now we got a little problem, don't we? You think this kind of stuff's not going to happen all over the place? Of course it is. And even if you turn the economy back on right now, are we going to avoid all of these things? No, but the longer this goes on, folks, the more acute this problem gets. There is no possible way for the government to know where all these connections are. I've talked about the thing with oil before. We've already got a problem brewing there. The reason gas is so cheap is not because oil has gotten so cheap. The reason gas is so cheap right now is because they almost literally can't give it away because nobody's using it. There is gasoline consumption among American motorists is now lower than it has been for 20 years. The problem is oil consumption generally for things like transportation, like trucks, those things that bring the food to your store. Yeah, that hasn't gone down. And yet the crack that comes off a barrel of oil is more or less fixed. You can't just turn a knob and say, I want all diesel fuel out of this oil. It doesn't work that way. We have to find a different path forward, folks. It's not an option. We have to do it now. We can't sit here for a month or 2 months. Fauci, he doesn't understand any of this stuff. I don't think Trump understands it. Somebody needs to grab both of these people by the hair and bang their heads together until they get some sort of sense knocked into them. You can't close an economy. You can take the people that are high risk and tell them to stay home. You can give them prophylaxis and reduce their risk. You can do everything in your power to reduce the cross-infection and the spreading of the virus from the healthcare workers, and to the extent that you can do it without making it impossible for them to do their jobs, the police, which are probably a major vector as well. That's another piece of information that nobody's talking about. A huge percentage of police forces are getting infected, and since we know half of the infections are asymptomatic, they're spreading it all over the community. Not only that, the people that they're interacting with for the most part are people that don't obey the law. This is extremely bad because those folks who they then give it to are going to go spread it through the community, and they're not going to obey any lockdown or quarantine order at all, ever. And then to make it better, we have judges all over the place releasing prisoners into the common community. Gee, they wouldn't have another interaction with a cop, get COVID, and spread it through all their crook friends, right? Oh my God! This is almost everything we're doing right now is backwards. Okay, I get it, folks. This is a bad virus. Okay, and then to add to that, we don't even know where we are in terms of antibodies because we're not doing antibody surveys. And Fauci says, that's not really a focus right now. Well, it damn well should have been a focus from the first day. And the tests are available. Don't tell me they're not. That's a bunch of BS. Look, I want to put this final thing up, and then I'm going to close. Here's a graph I posted yesterday along with the chart from this morning. It's the same graph. And it shows you that the social distancing and the lockdowns don't work. It also shows you that there is a baseline transmission rate for this virus, even when you socially distance, even when you lock down, even when you do all these things. And Sweden, interestingly enough, found it immediately. Now, I'm wondering if Sweden has solved the transmission out of the other channels, like the healthcare system, to a large degree. And as a result, that's why their R-naught hasn't changed. It's essentially a flat line the entire time. That's kind of interesting. We've also got data out of Iceland that seems to confirm somewhat similar numbers. And Iceland has a very high seropositive prevalence of people who are positive for the virus when they test, but are not symptomatic. And so we continue to see this evidence that the asymptomatic transmission rate, where you don't get sick but you get the virus, is about 50%. And that is, folks, that makes control through any kind of contact tracing and other sorts of quarantine measures impossible. It's just impossible. So, if people don't get sick, then there is no possible way for you to be able to do this because you can't possibly monitor PCR positive rates. In other words, active virus transmission in everybody in the American economy on an all-the-time basis every day. It can't be done, and yet that's what you would have to do to detect and stop that. It's impossible. All right, we're not going to get there. We must reopen the economy. We must prevent supply chain collapses. We do not know where they're going to come from. But for everybody like Drifter on the forum who says, hey, look, I got a couple months worth of stuff, and then at that point I'm back to practicing dentistry in the 19th century. And by the way, all he's doing right now under the orders that he's under is emergency procedures. So he's saying with the emergency, and that's another problem. I don't know if he owns his dental office, but what happens when he's only doing emergency procedures? How many cleanings does the average dentist do or cosmetic procedures compared to how many root canals? All right, what are you going to do when this guy can't pay his rent and he gets thrown out of his office? Now there's no dentist at all. Folks, this has to stop. This is madness. There's a better way. The link's up, and it needs to be enforced. We, the people, must stand up right now and tell our government this is going to happen now. Absolutely right now. We don't care whether you like it or not. We don't care what Fauci says. We don't care what Birx says. Birx is standing up there at the podium wagging her finger that we're not engaged in social justice. The hell we're not. It's being shoved down our throats. We're being threatened with arrest if we don't do what they say. And yet the numbers do not get down far enough to stop it. And even if they did, even if they were to tighten the screws to the point of welding bars across doors, which they did in Wuhan, and which, by the way, did drop their transmission rate. Their case rate started to actually decline. Okay, so they got below R0 1.0. It didn't work when they lifted it. Now it's back. They ran the same sort of crazy suppression routine in Singapore. It didn't work. It's back. We can't do this cyclic shutdown thing, folks. You cannot do it. You can put out guidelines. You can try to reduce the spread by strongly urging people. Good hand washing etiquette. You can urge people to socially distance. You can say, look, to the extent possible, stay 6 feet away from each other. But when you start doing things that destroy the economy and you close things down, it is not going to work. You reopen, the infection is going to come right back. And if you inculcate people into an environment of fear, you're going to have impacts on the economy that are going to be destructive and last for years, if not a decade. This is self-inflicted injury at this point, folks. It needs to end now. Not in 2 weeks, not in 3 weeks, not in 4 weeks, and not in June. Now. Or we're going to break something important. And when we do, a very large number of people are going to die.